Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says making social welfare universal. We have the government of India and respective state governments. They have initiated number of schemes and programs. Why? So that they can uplift the people of the poverty bracket, and at the same time they've initiated these schemes and programs so that they can empower the poor sections of the society. They can stand up on their feet. But the author here speaks about COVID-19 crisis. During the COVID-19 crisis, it is the poor sections and the vulnerable society which suffered the most, says the author. So the author here brings about issues and concerns suffered by the poor during the COVID-19 crisis. What does the author say? During COVID-19 crisis, what we witnessed is mass inter and intra migration, food insecurity issues, and a crumbling health infrastructure. It is not only about these, but as many as 75 million people also entered into the fold of poverty. What was the original intention? The original intention was to uplift people of this poverty bucket, but during the COVID-19 crisis, many people actually entered into the fold of poverty. It is not only the poor and the vulnerable sections, it also included the middle and the upper class who were also entering the knees of poverty. That is because of the second wave of COVID-19. As we are witnessing currently, it is taking a huge toll on the middle class as well. How? Let's say for example they have to go to a particular hospital. There are exorbitant prices because lack of beds has been there. There have been exorbitant charges even for the oxygen cylinders and the concentrators, which has led even the middle class enter into the fold of poverty. So the author here says it is not only about the economic capital, it is not only about the financial capital, it is not only about the dispersal of the money, but what matters the most during this particular period is social capital. So let's try and understand what is the social capital that the author is trying to say. When we speak about social capital, what is it about? It is about interpersonal relationship in a particular society. Let's say for example, if I as an individual, I am developing myself, or if the government is ensuring that I empower myself, or I grow myself, or I have some work, that is what is called as the human capital. So the investment is in terms of an individual, but if the investment is made in terms of the society, that is what is called a social capital. A social capital is where the society has interpersonal relationship, it is able to sympathize with the cause of the others, there is goodwill between the society, there is fellowship that is associated, there is sympathy and social intercourse that takes place within a particular society where there is more trust among the sections of the society. That is what is called as social capital. A social capital is where there is a trust, there is sympathy, there is goodwill within that particular society, is what is called as social capital. So the author in this particular case says even if the government is spending more and more, if there is lack of social capital where people do not trust each other, they do not empathize with the cause of the other, they have no compassion within the society, this will not deliver the goods during COVID-19, says the author. When we speak about social capital, this can be broken down into two segments. One is what is called as the bonding capital, the other is what is called as the bridging capital. What is this bonding capital? Let's say for example in a particular society there is homogeneous society, which means to say that people are categorized on the basis of religion, or they're categorized on the basis of language, or they have a particular bonding or network connections where they have a common interest and mutual attraction. So this mutual attraction or common bonding can be in terms of region, it can be in terms of religion, it can be in terms of language, or they have a common pattern amongst themselves. This is what is called as bonding capital. Let me give you an hypothetical situation. Let's say for example there is one of the issues. So what exactly happens? Let's say there is one of the ethnic groups, because there is an issue in the society, or a crime is committed, or there is a pandemic. Let's say there is one language people who all come together, they already have a mutual understanding amongst themselves, so they get together and ensure that this problem is solved. That is what is called as bonding capital. So what is is bonding capital? There is already a bond that is persistent in that particular society. So this is made use of, and they're planning to enhance and bring a solution to one of the problems. Then there is something called as bridging capital. What is a bridging capital? So it is connecting two dots. So there are two extreme groups, or you can say two different groups, one with a different language, the other with a different language, or with a different religion, or with a different religion. So what you have is different religions or languages or different communities where you have different kinds of people. So there is some gap that is persisting. So this gap has to be removed. That is what is called as the bridging capital. So the bridging capital is amongst different kinds of people, different communities of people, and different backgrounds of people. So what are we doing here? There is a dearth, there is intercommunication dearth. So there is bridging between these two communities or languages or religions or different backgrounds. That is what is called as bridging capital. So basically, when we speak about social capital, we have what is called as bonding capital, where they already have an established relationship, a good relationship, where they want to bring an end to a problem that is persisting in a society. That is what is bonding capital. And second, what we have is the bridging capital, where there are differences. These differences are sorted out so that all the existing gaps is completely done away with. So when we speak about social capital, what are the advantages? Let me give you an example. Let's say if there is a particular group, or let's say there are a group of people who are working in a pandemic. Let's say there is dearth with respect to the beds. Currently what we are witnessing is, due to COVID-19, there is lack of beds in the hospital, or let's say for example, there is requirement of the oxygen concentrator. If there is only one person looking for this oxygen concentrator or for the bed, what we will not find is options. But when there is a collective responsibility where the load is shifted, one person will be contacting another person, the other person will be contacting some other groups and organizations. So what we will have is a collective problem where the problem would be solved. Similarly, what we will have is faster recoveries for that particular problem. If there is one single individual or there is a small group which is inquiring it, it may take a lot of time. But if we have more groups, more networking, more social groups and entities and organizations and groups coming together, what we will have is speedy recoveries with respect to that particular solution. So communities and neighborhoods which have little social capital may not be able to find themselves unable to keep up with the counterparts that have deep networks when it comes to the society. Apart from this, when there is an individual or a group, or he supported a particular group or an individual in the past, in the near future, what we can also witness is reciprocity. So because I have supported a particular person now, the other person who's taken help from me in the near future may help me as well. That is what is called as reciprocity. So these are some of the advantages when it comes to the social capital. But what are the disadvantages of social capital, or you can also call it as challenges when it comes to the social capital? What exactly happens? What is this social capital is still vague. Why? Because it is the rich who have well connected communities, who have well connected networkings. It is only those people who would be able to make advantage or take advantages of the social capital. What about the poor? What about the vulnerable? Let's say they are living in the remote pockets of the country, or they are completely disassociated with the people. Does it mean these people should not extract the benefits of the government? So social capital is vague, hard to measure, poorly defined, and does not have any form of capital when it comes to the poor sections of the society. Apart from this, when you look into the social capital, what we initially discussed was bonding capital and bridging capital. What if we are not able to bridge the differences between one community to another community, from one community which has a background to another community which has a different background? So it means that we would be treating them as outsiders. So that means the social capital as a concept will again not work. Apart from this, if this social capital is used for a good cause, then it is completely okay for the welfare of the people. But what if it is used for a bad cause or an illegal cause? That means the social capital is indirectly supporting the antisocial elements which will disturb the fabric of the society. So the author here says that in spite of the financial capital, financial disbursement given by the government, what also matters in the society is the social capital. Let's say, for example, people are going to the trauma, what they require is sympathy. Let's say, for example, beds are not present, people will have to come together, address these concerns. What you require is multiple stakeholders entering into the picture. So it is not only about the money that is dispersed by the government, but multiple stakeholders all come up. They have to empathize and have goodwill towards the society. So the importance is towards the social capital, says the author. So the author here voices out certain concerns when it comes to the present crisis during the COVID-19. Yes, the government has come up with schemes and programs. It has initiated programs as well, but these schemes and programs have not reached those in need and who actually deserve this particular scheme and program, says the author. This is where he asks India to adopt one of the system called as the poor law system, which was present in Ireland in the 19th century. According to this poor law system that is present in Ireland, what it did was it taxed people at the local level. What did it do? The minute they started taxing the people at the local level, the money that is extracted from the system in Ireland was effectively made use for the poor. So what did they do? They extracted money by taxing the people, and the money that was used did not only provide financial incentives to the poor, but it also gave them dignity and respect when these programs were being distributed for the poor sections. So it also provided social insurance, social assistance, universal schemes, and extra benefits and supplements to the poor sections of the society. So the author here is speaking about importing such a concept to India. So the author wants such a paradigm where it is not only about the financial incentives given, but it is also about respecting the poor, giving dignity to the poor, and encashing on the social capital is the primary importance, says the author. Currently, when we look into the multiple schemes that we have, schemes cover a wide variety of social protections. However, they're fractionalized across various departments and sub schemes. And further, we have issues between the central government and state governments as well. The central government has a different database, the state government has a different database. So what we have is who is getting the benefits. Again, we do not have enough data. So the problem is that the state governments and the central governments have different databases. That once again is a problem in identifying who is the right beneficiary. So the author here suggests that what we require is a consolidated database where in case there is a requirement of a particular scheme whose beneficiary would be able to extract from it, what we require is a consolidated data so that both the central government and state governments would be able to universally ensure that the scheme is provided to such a person. What we also have to focus is on data digitization, data driven decision making, and collaborative across government departments. Since there is too much of compartmentalization, too many departments that are involved in a particular scheme and program, coordination and cooperation amongst all the departments is the need of the hour, says the author. Let's say, for example, when we speak about PDS system, what we are looking is at providing a particular welfare scheme only for few sections of the society. But there are other welfare schemes. Let's say, for example, we are speaking about education, maternity benefits, disability benefits. So whoever wants it, it has to be universally provided by the government, either by the center or by the state, is what the author is suggesting. So going forward, what we require is addressing all these problems and issues between the center and the state government so that effective implementation of a welfare scheme happens at the universal basis, is what is this article all about. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says misinformed and misleading. we have the health ministry in India. It had come up with what is called as the COVID-19 management guidelines in the year 2020. What were these guidelines all about? This is for multiple stakeholders. It is for the administration, it is also for the healthcare personnel as well. What should the administration do? What should the healthcare personnel do was all addressed under the COVID-19 management guidelines. But the author here speaks about that these guidelines given by the health ministry will have to be reformed every now and then. Why? Because there could have been some drugs or medicines which might have been added in the past, but now we have enough statistics and data which has proved that such a drug may not be useful for the people. So what we require is a periodic upgradation. What we require is periodic reforms and changes which has to be introduced by the health ministry in terms of drug delivery to the patients and also in terms of the administrative efficiency. Let's try and understand what is the author trying to convey. We have n number of medicines which have been tried for the COVID-19 patients in the past. So what are these? Let's say for example, we have the hydroxychloroquine. When the COVID-19 hit us all, we did not have a vaccine nor did we have any drugs. But what was being predicted is that since it was a virus which was impacting the people, similar drugs were similar symptoms, that drug would be administered to the COVID-19 patient. So one of the drug that was administered to the COVID-19 patient initially was what is called as hydroxychloroquine. This hydroxychloroquine was also exported to number of countries by India as well. But currently, when you look into the statistics, it has been clearly said that it has no use when it comes to the COVID-19. But what is the major issue right now? Yes, the doctors are not administering this to the COVID-19 patients. The healthcare personnel are not administering it. But the problem is that the management guidelines still holds that hydroxychloroquine in that particular guideline. So the author says ideally this should have been reformed. The healthcare personnel are not giving it to the patients, but the health ministry suitably on time taking data into picture will also have to remove this from the management guideline, says the author. Next, the author considers what is called as convalescent plasma. According to Indian Council of Medical Research, they looked into this particular issue. If the convalescent plasma is useful for the COVID-19 patients, this research done by the Indian Council of Medical Research proved that it was not of much use when it comes to the COVID-19 patients. A similar evidence was also given by number of experiments that was conducted in United Kingdom, but only one experiment or evidence that was conducted in Argentina proved that convalescent plasma was good for the COVID-19 patients, but when it comes to UK and ICMR, it proved it was of no use to the COVID-19 patients. So, going forward, the health ministry will have to revise, reform and bring new changes with respect to the management guidelines. Apart from this, the author brings into picture some of the issues and concerns with respect to the administration and also with respect to the patients. What are these issues and concerns? Let's say for example, as we discussed last year, when COVID-19 broke the hell out of the world, we started exporting hydroxychloroquine. But do remember, hydroxychloroquine, when it was administered, it was initially said it is efficient, but we did realize with number of trials and evidences it is of no use to the COVID-19 patients. But when such hydroxychloroquine was being exported, when it was being administered to the COVID-19 patients, who suffered the most? The people who actually deserved the hydroxychloroquine. Let's say for example, it is used to treat and prevent malaria which is caused by mosquito bites, or it was useful for reducing the skin problems when it comes to the lupus, or preventing swelling or pain when it comes to the arthritis patients. So when you have arthritis patient for whom this particular hydroxychloroquine is very important, but the hydroxychloroquine was completely diverted towards COVID-19, who will be the major sufferers? It is these arthritis patients as well as those who are infected with malaria. Apart from this, we have what is called as the budesonide inhalers. This is also currently being administered to the COVID-19 patients in case they have mild symptoms. But if this particular budesonide inhalers are administered to the COVID patients, who will suffer the most? those who were suffering from asthma will be the major sufferers. One of the trials that was conducted, called as the principal trial, did prove that there is no efficiency with respect to the budesonide inhalers. So who are the sufferers? The one who are suffering from asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases may run out of this budesonide inhalers. Apart from this, we have azithromycin, doxycycline, favipiravir, itolizumab or coronil. These are still being administered by the healthcare personnel, but this is not present in the management guidelines as prescribed by the health ministry. So what is the author trying to say? The author says this is not prescribed by the health ministry, but the administrative personnel will have to ensure, should have a vigilant eyes, as this might also have side effects on the patient. So what it speaks about is that there has to be changes that has to be brought both by the health ministry and also when it comes to the administrative personnel. Going forward, the government of India will have to ensure that all these issues are addressed. Only oxygen delivery, steroids and anticoagulants will have to be prescribed from the healthcare personnel to the patient, says the author. So what is the importance is, when a particular drug is being administered, it has to be seen on the basis of evidence whether that particular drug is correct or not, is it efficient or not. Next, it has to be looked in terms of pricing. Next, it has to be looked in terms of cost effectiveness, and only if it is right, only if we have data and statistics, only then it has to be present in the management guidelines. So the author here is speaking about, if this is not addressed by the government, if the administrative personnel do not bring this particular change, we would have more issues and concerns. One, the genuine people who would require this particular medication will not be able to find it, and even if they find it, the cost of this particular drug will be exorbitant. So what we will have is that they may have to spend more on useless drugs which is not important for COVID-19, and the ones who actually deserve it will be missing. So what we will have is boost in the cost, says the author. So the guidelines should be rewritten with respect to the present situation, with respect to the new updates, with respect to the new validations and experiments conducted by world community. Is what is this article all about? It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says salutary steps. The article here is speaking about the functioning of the Election Commission of India in reference to the multi-phase elections that take place across India in multiple states. So our emphasis would primarily be about multi-phase elections. What are we going to discuss? We will critically analyze whether the multi-phase elections should be taking place in multiple states, yes or no. Why is this in picture? That is because the Election Commission of India announced what is called as the 8-fail poll schedule when it comes to the West Bengal Assembly. So why did it announce so? According to Election Commission of India, there were festivals that were coming up in West Bengal, which is one of the reasons why we have 8-phase polls or elections in the West Bengal region. Followed by this, when we have elections that is taking place in a huge state like West Bengal, what we also have to make sure is that this happens without any violence. If this has to happen without any violence, who is the most important factor? It is the security personnel. These security personnel cannot be restricted to just one region, so they have to move from one region to another. Large number of security personnel will have to move as well. So these security personnel and their movement will take a lot of time. So the second reason why we have 8-phase poll in West Bengal or in any of the state is because we have to boost the security in that particular region. And the third, why we had the 8-phase poll in West Bengal was also because of increased number of polling stations. That is because currently we are going through some torrid times of COVID-19. Earlier, we would have less number of polling booths, but because of polling booths during the COVID-19 is increased, which is why we require more security forces. So the author in this particular case says that the Election Commission went ahead with 8-phase poll in West Bengal primarily because of all these reasons. Apart from this, let's say for example, there is a particular district in a particular state. This particular district in a state, there would be parts that would be divided of the elections. Why? Let's say in the past, this particular district would have seen anti-social elements capture the polling booth, or there might be rigging of elections that is taking place, or this might be a Naxalite heartland as well, where they would not let people enter the polling booth and vote. In such a situation, what we would require is more security forces in order to combat all the anti-social elements who are present in that particular district. So apart from the state, there would be few districts where elections happen in part primarily because of these anti-social elements. So in order to make sure that we have the peaceful elections, that is why number of phase polls or phase elections take place, says the author. This is what is the intention of the election commission, and this is why we have multiple phases, says the author. But there is an alternative picture when it comes to the multiple phases. Let's say for example, when we have too many phases, as like in West Bengal, currently West Bengal went through what is called as 8 phase poll. If there are more phases, what we will witness is more tensions in the society. This tensions will also result in what is called as peace disturbance in couple of districts. Let's say they are divided on the basis of religion in that particular area, or they divided on the basis of ethnicity in that particular area. In the state of West Bengal, what we also have is the borderland, which is divided on the basis of historical past, or there might be issues with respect to religion as well. More the phases, what we will have is more tensions as well. Apart from that, political parties always engage in electioneering. During this particular process, what they also involve is in pitting people against each other. So this is where political parties, as they are into the election process, it can result in increased tensions. It can also mean more money is being spent by the election and its political candidates. So the amount of money that which is spent can also be reduced during this particular period, says the author. Added to this particular issue, let's say if there are 8 phases of poll or 8 phases of election, what we also require is the security forces. These security forces also go through something called as the saturation point. They would be drained out of their energy. Why? Because they have to keep moving constantly all over. So what they actually witness is in this particular point a fatigue because of handling the crowd as well as handling of the elections. This might also result in security forces not being able to give their full during this particular election. As a result, all these issues will persist if there are more elections and more phased elections, says the author. In fact, we have the former chief election commissioner, which happens to be T.S. Krishnamurthy, who has gone ahead and said such an issue of more phases and election should be resisted, and what we should have going forward is single phase elections, says the author. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says antimicrobial resistance, the silent threat. What is this antimicrobial resistance? What are the various issues concerning this? Why is there an antimicrobial resistance? What is the initiative taken by the World Health Organization? What is the initiative taken by India? Has been explained in 6th topic, battling antimicrobial resistance, and the link for the same will be given in the description box, so kindly look into it. We would be providing you a link, so this link will have the explanation for the antimicrobial resistance under the 6th topic, so kindly look into it. The author here suggests that because of the antimicrobial resistance, what we are witnessing is huge challenges and problems when it comes to this antimicrobial resistance. What are those problems? Without functional antimicrobials to treat bacterial and fungal infections, even the most surgical procedures as well as cancer chemotherapy will be fraught with risk from untreatable infections. With more resistance, because we would not be able to take such antibiotics, what it will result is in untreatable infections, says the author. Apart from this, the neonatal and the maternal mortality will also increase. all these effects will be felt globally. Yes, to a greater extent, the developed and the developing countries all will face it, but the scenario will be more exaggerated when it comes to low middle income countries of Asia and Africa, says the author. Yes, it will impact most people in the developed and the developing countries, but the gravity and magnitude of this particular incident will be comparatively more in the poor countries, says the author. In order to overcome this particular issue, we have one of the fund called as the Antimicrobial Resistance Action Fund. The concept of AMR Action Fund was developed by International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations and Biopharmaceutical CEOs Roundtable, Biopharmaceutical Companies and Foundation in collaboration with the World Health Organization, the European Investment Bank and the Wellcome Trust. Why did they come up with the fund? Is initiated by all these organizations and bodies primarily because what antibiotics require is periodic updation. What we also have to come up with is new antibiotics over a period of time. But these antibiotics will require huge amount of finances. A single company or a single government would not be able to do so. That is why they have created what is called as the AMR Action Fund. According to it, it will forge partnership with institutions, philanthropic organizations to strengthen and accelerate antibiotic development. So most institutes come together, governments come together, they invest certain amount of money so that they can come up with new antibiotics in the near future. As of now, there are projects that are stalled. As of now, they have seen a deadlock. They're not taking any motion in the near future, which is why we would require more new antibiotics in the near future to fight the resistance. So a requirement of the funding becomes a key. So this AMR Action Fund is where all the parties come together, invest in a single pool so that this money can be used in the near future for new types of development and research and development. This is what is the importance of AMR Action Fund. Apart from this, there have been other initiatives taken in couple of countries. Let's take the example of Peru. What has Peru done? It has given an awareness program to its people and its citizens. This will basically reduce unnecessary antibiotic prescriptions. On one side, it is giving awareness to the people so that they don't go with the antibiotics. On the other side, it has asked the doctors and people who prescribed it to use it at a minimal level. Added with this, what we have is one of the initiatives that which is taken care in Denmark. What is this initiative taken in the country of Denmark? Basically, when we look into the antibiotics, they are administered to the livestock. Let's say for example, if the chicken is well, why? To make sure that they have enough weight during a particular period. So when it is being administered to the livestock, especially to the chicken, this will also get transmitted to the human beings and the bacteria might become resistant to this antibiotic. So what Denmark has done, it has made sure that there is reduction in the prevalence of microbes in the animals, and at the same time it has improved other efficient farming techniques so that this antibiotics is not administered to the livestock. So similar such examples can be used in India and similar such examples can be imported from other countries, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Is it time to rethink on multi-phase polls? Critically analyze. Next question. The COVID-19 guidelines should be rewritten in cognizance of the current strains on the healthcare system. Substantiate. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review and please do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.